What's up guys, my name is Jess Gill and this is Research UK. Today I'm honoured to be joined by Douglas Carswell, former UKIP MP and now currently working at the Mississippi Centre for Public Policy. So recently Nigel Farage stated that he predicts immigration numbers will be bigger than they were under Tony Blair, calling it the biggest Brexit betrayal. Was Brexit about immigration?
Brexit was about a lot of things. Immigration was incredibly important. As someone who co-founded the official campaign that won the Brexit referendum, I've always been slightly bemused, however, since the vote. I've had various people explain to me why people voted for Brexit. I mean, surely we should recognize that there were 16 or 17 million reasons why people voted for Brexit. And the reasons why I voted for Brexit and why you might have voted for Brexit or why people we know might have voted for Brexit are all slightly different, but immigration was clearly very important. I'm not sure it's really sensible to talk about betrayal. Clearly, there is a major problem with boats coming across the channel. If we are to address this problem, we need to take a lesson from Australia. Australia had a similar problem, boats coming in, the inability of the government to act, courts ready to intervene. We need to stop the boats. The only way you're going to stop future traffickers coming across the channel is if you're prepared to stop the boats. People who come across the channel on boats must be removed from the UK. You have to do that. If they remain in the UK, you have the incentive for more people to come. So I think we need to stop the boats. It's predictable but unfortunate that a European court has decided to rule the way it has. I rather feel that we voted to stop having unelected European judges meddle in these sorts of things. Fundamentally, we need to be prepared to act as a sovereign nation. We need to produce leaders who know they have the moral authority to decide. And we need to clearly tackle head on the ruling of the court. It's inevitable that you're going to get this kind of lawfare to try to stop the government clamping down on immigration. I think this is actually an issue where we should be prepared to fight the human rights lobby. On this issue, there's a clear majority of the public in support of what the government is trying to do. And I think tactically and strategically, this is a fight that we can win. I hope the government doesn't leave it too late in the electoral cycle. I think it needs to act, and it needs to act urgently and now.
What would replace the European Court of Human Rights? Would it be a British Bill of Rights, which the British government is considering now? Do you think that's the solution? And how would it differ from what the European Court of Human Rights does already?
When David Cameron was leader of the opposition, he talked about a British Bill of Rights. And I remember writing a letter to him. I actually sat on the Joint Committee on Human Rights in the House of Commons at the time. And I wrote a letter to him expressing concern about the idea of a British Bill of Rights. Why? America has a Bill of Rights, but of course the American Bill of Rights was drafted some time ago when you could rely on people to have what you might call a default minimalist view about the state's role. If you were to draft a British Bill of Rights today, I fear that rather than having a few sensible safeguards, it would reflect the prejudices of the legal profession at the moment, and that Bill of Rights would actually become a charter for judicial activism. I'm not sure that one necessarily needs to give judges a series of rights that empower them to adjudicate. They already seem to be willing to adjudicate on the basis of whatever they want. They're extraordinarily creative at doing so. I would be very cautious about what actually goes in the Bill of Rights and what the impact of that Bill of Rights is. Now, I think we need to address a more fundamental problem, which is who judges the judges. In Britain, you get people like Lady Hale, who she's no more democratically elected than you or I are now. I mean, in fact, I at some point in my career, I think I had a slightly bigger democratic mandate than she does. But what is it that allows people like Lady Hale sitting in their so-called Supreme Court to decide that they are going to, in effect, decide not just what the law says, but what the law ought to be? Who judges these people? Who holds them to account? I think we need to fundamentally reform the Judicial Appointments Commission. I think if the judges are going to behave as unelected politicians in wigs, which is what they've become, we need to look very carefully at how we scrutinize and confirm the appointment of the judges. I'm not sure that many of the judges sitting in the British Supreme Court today would be able to demonstrate democratically credible criteria for some of the positions that they hold. So I think what we need to do is challenge the legitimacy of the Supreme Court and the judges to make the decisions it does. I'm a little bit wary about drafting a Bill of Rights that might actually add to their scope for adjudication.
What rights do you think we should have? It seems like we've gone way further than the original life, liberty and property, with the increase of human rights that are way more politicised and more concerned with positive rights rather than negative rights. What do you think should be defined as a right?
Well, of course, Britain drafted a Bill of Rights in 1689, I think it was, a year after the Glorious Revolution. Now, that Bill of Rights, sadly, has often been supplanted by subsequent legislation. But I think there's much that we could learn from it. Certainly, the American rebels about 100 years later learned from the British Bill of Rights, because if you look at the text in the American Bill of Rights, a lot of the language is often borrowed directly from the British Bill of Rights. I think one of the reasons why the American Bill of Rights works is because it's very simple. It, for example, forbids Congress from passing laws that will limit free speech. I think that is something that we can all agree should be included if we are going to have a Bill of Rights. I think America has a particular tradition with gun ownership that we don't have in the UK, and I'm not sure we'd necessarily want to emulate every aspect of the American Bill of Rights. But there's an enormous amount in the American Bill of Rights: the simplicity of the language, the clarity of the language, the focus on the individual, the rights of the individual. And I think it's often unambiguous, unambivalent. And if we are going to have a Bill of Rights, particularly the sections in the American Bill of Rights that safeguard freedom of speech, I think we could certainly learn from. It's one of the wonderful things about this country, which is that when you pass a law or propose to pass a law, you have to think very, very carefully: does it violate individual liberty? And I think that's one thing about the American system that actually works and works incredibly well.
Do you think that if we leave or challenge the European Court of Human Rights, it will increase Britain's sovereignty? While I was only 12 during the referendum, that was a big point of Brexit, sovereignty. And with the government being unable to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, it's humiliated them over who governs Britain. And it's almost as if the government doesn't have sovereignty, even though we've left the EU.
I think you could say that throughout the history of Europe over the past 800 years, maybe even 1,000 years, there have been kind of two rival and competing ideas. There has been the kind of imperial idea, often advocated by the Holy Roman Empire or the Holy Roman Emperor, or on occasions the papacy, which is that there should be institutions in Europe that hold a sway and a remit and a jurisdiction over the whole of Europe. And opposing that is this idea that actually, and it's an idea that found expression most powerfully after the Treaty of Westphalia, which is that actually no, there is no supranational body within Europe that has this authority, and that actually power and authority reside at what today we would call the nation state level. I had assumed that the old antiquated idea that a small group of princelings and today lawyers could sit in one capital of Europe and determine what should apply in other jurisdictions in Europe. I had assumed that was a pre-modern idea that had fallen away. But actually we see that idea back. It is alive and well. We thought we had clobbered it when we left the European Union. It's popped up again with this wretched human rights court. We need to be clear. the United Kingdom and Britain is a sovereign country. We do not subscribe to the pre-modern idea that there are a small body of people in Europe who hold jurisdiction over the rest of us, and we're simply not going to recognize their remit and their jurisdiction. And I think we need to be clear about this. It's not a position of nationalism or xenophobia. It is straightforward modernity. I thought we had resolved many of these questions in 1688 or in America 1776, and certainly I thought we had settled this in 2016. This court is on the wrong side of history. It is ultimately an appeal to a pre-modern idea that Europe should bend to the will of a small clique, and it's not going to wash.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carswell, for agreeing to come on Reasoned, and thank you, the viewer, for watching and supporting this channel. Please like, comment and subscribe. That would help us out so much. Thank you. I'm Jess Gill and this is Reasoned. Goodbye.